They thought he was weak, just another man in a wheelchair, an easy target. But when a ruthless biker gang surrounded him in a deserted parking lot, they had no idea who they were really messing with. One phone call, a few quiet words, and everything changed. What happened next? You won't believe it. Watch till the end. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The late afternoon sun stretched across the asphalt, casting long shadows in the parking lot of Hank's Roadside Diner in Wichita, Kansas. The scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon drifted through the air, mingling with the faint rumble of passing 18-wheelers. Inside the diner, locals nursed their refills, swapping stories of the week, while truckers sat at the counter, eyeing their plates of chicken-fried steak. It was the kind of place where time moved slow, where the biggest excitement of the day was the next slice of homemade pie. But outside, something was about to shift. James Carter rolled into the parking lot, his custom wheelchair gliding smoothly over the pavement. Dressed in a crisp button-down and well-worn jeans, he exuded a quiet confidence, one that came from years of knowing how to carry himself in a world that often saw him as less. His dark skin, his composed expression, the way he moved, none of it begged for attention, and yet he always seemed to draw it. Across the lot, 5 men leaned against their motorcycles, leather vests displaying the patch of the Iron Fangs MC, a local biker group with a reputation for taking what they wanted and daring anyone to challenge them. Their leader, Travis Bear Johnson, a burly, broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, tilted his head as he spotted James. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Check this out," Bear muttered, elbowing Luke, a wiry, tattooed biker barely out of his 20s. Luke snorted, running a hand over his buzzed head. "Man, what is this?" Luke chuckled. "Did someone lose their wheelchair warrior?" The others laughed, their voices cutting through the otherwise peaceful evening. James, however, didn't react. Years of experience had taught him not to give men like them the satisfaction of a reaction. He kept his focus forward, pushing toward the diner doors, his hands moving fluidly over the wheel rims. But Bear wasn't about to let it go. The sound of heavy boots crunching against gravel followed James as Bear stepped away from his bike, the rest of the group falling in behind him like a pack sensing an easy kill. "Hey, hold up there, buddy," Bear called, his voice carrying across the lot. James stopped, exhaling through his nose. He didn't want trouble, but he wasn't about to run from it either. He turned his head slightly, meeting Bear's eyes with a steady, unreadable gaze. "Something you need?" James asked, his tone even, controlled. Bear grinned, his teeth flashing under the flickering parking lot light. "Nah, man. Just wondering where the fire is. Ain't every day we see someone like you rolling through our town like they own the place." Luke snickered, mimicking the motion of spinning wheels with his hands. "Yeah. You sure you're not going to run us over?" The group erupted into laughter again. But James, he didn't smile. He didn't flinch. Instead, he adjusted his position, preparing to wheel past them without another word. Bear's grin faltered just slightly. He didn't like being ignored, and James was about to find out just how far they were willing to push him. The gravel crunched under Bear's heavy boots as he took another step forward, planting himself directly in James Carter's path. The laughter from the other bikers faded into something darker, something unspoken but heavy in the air. This wasn't just about a few cheap laughs anymore. It was about power, about control. And Bear wasn't about to let a man in a wheelchair walk, or rather roll, away from him without proving a point. James stopped, his hands resting lightly on the rims of his wheelchair. His pulse was steady, his expression unreadable. He had dealt with men like Bear before. Men who thrived on intimidation, on pushing people just far enough to watch them crack. But James didn't. "Not so fast," Bear said, his grin widening, though there was something sharper in his gaze now. "We're just having a little fun, no need to be rude." James met his gaze head-on, unwavering. "I don't have time for games." The moment stretched. taut and silent. The other bikers shifted on their feet, sensing the tension thickening between the two men. James wasn't backing down. That alone was enough to make Bear's grin falter ever so slightly. Luke, the wiry, tattooed biker, let out a low chuckle and crossed his arms. "Man's got an attitude, huh?" He took a step closer, peering down at James like he was examining some strange curiosity. "Maybe you should slow down, Wheels. Show a little respect." James exhaled slowly, keeping his voice calm, measured. "Respect? That's funny, coming from a guy who thinks 5-on-1 is a fair fight." A couple of the bikers let out sharp laughs, but the amusement didn't reach their eyes. The tension had shifted. James had called it for what it was, and now Bear had to decide whether to take this further or back down. And backing down in front of his crew? That wasn't an option. Bear's grin vanished, his fingers curled slightly at his sides. "You got a smart mouth, don't you?" James shrugged. "Somebody's got to have brains in this parking lot." A low murmur rippled through the group. Luke's smirk twisted into something more sinister. "You're real comfortable running that mouth, huh? Maybe it's time someone shuts it for you." Bear held up a hand, stopping Luke before he could get any closer. "Nah," he said, his voice softer now but more dangerous. "I don't think we need to get our hands dirty." He tilted his head, studying James. "Let me guess, you're thinking about calling the cops? That it?" James let the question sit for a moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't move fast, didn't make any sudden motions, but every single one of them saw it. Bear narrowed his eyes. "What do you think you're doing?" James didn't answer. He simply pressed a button and held the phone to his ear. The bikers exchanged glances, their bravado flickering with something else. Uncertainty. "Cops ain't gonna do much for you out here," Bear sneered. "You think they give a damn about one guy in a wheelchair?" James didn't look at him. He spoke into the phone, his voice low, steady. Just a few short words. Then he hung up and smiled. The shift was immediate. The bikers weren't laughing anymore. Bear squinted at James, his shoulders tensing. "Who the hell did you just call?" James slid the phone back into his pocket, adjusting his position in his chair. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Luke let out a forced laugh, but it was thinner than before. "Man, you're trying too hard. Ain't nobody coming for you." James remained silent. But the look in his eyes, that was the real problem. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that made a man question just how in control he really was. Minutes ticked by. The bikers shifted, their easy confidence unraveling piece by piece. Then the rumble started. Faint at first, just a low, distant growl, like a storm gathering on the horizon. But it grew. The sound of engines. A lot of them. Bear turned his head toward the road, his expression darkening. He recognized that sound. Luke muttered under his breath, his cocky smirk gone. "No way." James watched them carefully, his lips curling just slightly. The engines roared closer, filling the air with their unmistakable power. And then, they appeared. A convoy of motorcycles riding in tight formation, their chrome glinting in the golden light of the setting sun. There were dozens of them clad in black leather, their jackets emblazoned with the insignia of a well-known but rarely spoken of group. The Sentinels. The Guardians of the Road? Bear stiffened, his fingers clenched at his sides. Luke swallowed hard. Bear?" he murmured, his voice tight. James finally spoke, his tone light, almost amused. "Still think I'm alone?" The convoy pulled into the parking lot with precision, their movements controlled, deliberate. The sound of engines filled the space, drowning out everything else. Bear took an instinctive step back. The balance of power had shifted, and now the real reckoning was about to begin. The deep, guttural roar of engines filled the air, drowning out every other sound in the parking lot. It was the kind of noise that settled into your bones, a sound that commanded attention. It wasn't just a group of bikers riding in. It was a force. Bear's cocky smirk was gone. His fingers twitched at his sides, and though he tried to keep his stance firm, there was a stiffness to it now. He had been so sure of his control, of his dominance over the situation. But control was a funny thing. It only lasted as long as nobody bigger, stronger, and more disciplined showed up to take it away. And right now, that was exactly what was happening. Luke, the wiry young biker who had been the loudest just minutes ago, swallowed hard. "Ah, Bear?" His voice had lost its usual sneering confidence. "This don't look good, man." It didn't. The Sentinels pulled into the parking lot with precision, their bikes lining up in perfect formation. Not a word was spoken, no unnecessary movements, just the sound of engines cutting off one by one, followed by the sharp crunch of boots hitting the gravel as they dismounted. James sat perfectly still in his wheelchair, watching it all unfold with quiet certainty. Bear tried to play it off. He adjusted his vest, puffed out his chest, and let out a forced chuckle. "Well, well," he said, lifting his chin. "Looks like you called your babysitters." No response. Instead, one of the Sentinels, a tall man with a silver beard and piercing blue eyes, stepped forward. His name was Hawk. He was a legend in the biker world, not because he talked the loudest or swung his fists the fastest, but because when he spoke, people listened. And right now, Bear was listening. Hawk stopped a few feet from James, his gaze assessing. "You good, brother?" he asked, his voice low but commanding. James nodded once. "I am now." Hawk turned then, his sharp eyes locking onto Bear. His expression didn't change. He didn't sneer, didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. Bear let out another chuckle, though this one sounded forced. All right, he said, throwing up his hands. "This is all a big misunderstanding. No need to get your guys all worked up." Silence. Bear cleared his throat, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The rest of his crew? They weren't backing him up now. Luke, the loudmouth, was suddenly very interested in the gravel beneath his boots. The others exchanged nervous glances, their tough guy act crumbling with every passing second. Hawk took a single step forward. It was slow, deliberate. Bear flinched. "Let me tell you something," Hawk said, his voice measured, calm. "We don't like bullies. And what I see here," he nodded toward James, "that looks like bullying to me." Bear shook his head quickly. "Nah, man, you got it all wrong. We were just messing around." Hawk's expression remained unreadable. Messing around? He let the words hang in the air, their weight pressing down on the group of bikers like a slow-building storm. Bear shifted uncomfortably. Yeah. No harm, no foul." Hawk turned to James. "You feel like this was just messing around?" James let the silence stretch before answering. "Didn't feel like a joke to me." A murmur rippled through the Sentinels. Just a small, subtle shift in energy, but it was enough to make the outlaw rebels uneasy. Hawk exhaled slowly. "You see, that's the thing. You don't get to decide if it was just messing around. The man you targeted does. And from where I'm standing?" His eyes hardened. "You picked the wrong guy." Bear's jaw clenched. His bravado was fading fast, but he wasn't the type to admit defeat, at least not without trying to salvage his ego first. "All right, fine," he said. "If it's an apology you want." He turned to James, forcing a smirk. "Sorry, man. Didn't mean to hurt your feelings." Hawk didn't move. The Sentinels didn't move. "James?" He just smiled. "That didn't sound like you meant it." The silence that followed was icy. Bear's fingers curled into fists. "I said I'm so—" Hawk raised an eyebrow. "And I said we don't like bullies." He took another step forward. "So here's what's going to happen. You and your boys are going to apologize, properly. And then you're going to leave. Because if I hear so much as a whisper about you pulling this kind of stunt again," his voice dropped lower, deadly quiet, "you won't like what happens next." The tension in the parking lot was suffocating. Luke, ever the coward, was the first to break. Yeah, okay, man. We're sorry. One by one, the others mumbled their apologies, their voices lacking their usual edge. Bear hesitated. He looked at James, then at Hawk, then at his crew, who were already backing away, wanting no part of whatever storm was about to hit. Bear gritted his teeth. Fine, his voice was clipped. I'm sorry. James nodded. That's more like it. Hawk didn't say another word. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any threat could ever be. The outlaw rebels didn't stick around. They scrambled to their bikes, the same ones they had stood so proudly beside just minutes ago. The engines roared to life, but this time, it wasn't a sound of dominance. It was retreat. James watched them go, his expression calm, composed. The sentinels didn't move until the last of the outlaw rebels disappeared down the road, their dust settling in the fading sunlight. Then, finally, Hawk turned back to James. You sure you're good? James extended a hand. Thanks to you, yeah. He looked. Hawk grasped his hand firmly. You don't owe us thanks, brother. You call, we show up. That's how it works. James nodded. Still, I appreciate it. Hawk smirked slightly. Next time, call sooner. James chuckled. Didn't need to. I knew you'd come. And just like that, the tension lifted. The sentinels mounted their bikes again, their engines roaring back to life, but this time, it was a sound of solidarity. James sat back in his chair watching them ride off into the setting sun, knowing that tonight, he had won. The rumble of engines faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the confrontation itself. The sentinels had left their mark, not with fists, not with threats, but with the sheer force of presence and an unshakable sense of unity. James exhaled, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the last remnants of tension. The fight was over before it even began, but that didn't make it any less exhausting. He had been through worse in his life, but this moment reminded him of something deep, something he had always known but had just witnessed in action. True strength wasn't about proving who was the loudest or the toughest. It was about standing firm, no matter what. The outlaw rebels had scurried away like beaten dogs, and though they had mumbled apologies, James knew it wasn't about their words. It was about what they had just learned. The world wasn't theirs to intimidate. The vulnerable weren't so vulnerable when they had people behind them. And most of all, a man in a wheelchair wasn't someone to be pitied or pushed aside. With a quiet sigh, James turned his chair toward the diner. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Inside, he could see the curious stares of the patrons who had been watching from the windows. Some looked guilty, as if ashamed for not stepping in. Others looked awed, maybe even inspired. He reached for the door, but before he could push it open, it swung outward. Tracy, the waitress, stood there. She was a tough woman, mid-50s, blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail, the kind of person who had seen it all and put up with none of it. But right now, her usual sharp expression was softened, her eyes scanning him as if to make sure he was really okay. You gonna come in or you gonna sit out here looking dramatic? She asked, crossing her arms. James chuckled. Dramatic? I thought I was making an entrance. Tracy smirked, stepping aside. Entrance my ass. Get in here before your coffee gets cold. As he wheeled inside, the murmurs in the diner quieted. Conversations had clearly been about him, and now that he was in the room, people weren't sure if they should keep whispering or pretend like nothing had happened. James didn't care either way. He made his way to his usual booth near the window, the chair's wheels gliding smoothly over the linoleum floor. Tracy followed, flipping over the coffee cup in front of him and pouring a fresh brew. So, she said, sliding into the seat across from him, are we going to talk about what just happened, or do I just pretend I didn't see you go all Clint Eastwood on those idiots? James took a sip of coffee, savoring the warmth. Wasn't much to talk about. Tracy raised an eyebrow. That right? 'Cause from where I stood, I just saw a bunch of arrogant morons get their egos handed to them on a silver platter. James smirked. They picked the wrong fight. Tracy studied him for a long moment. No offense, James, but people like that, they don't pick fights unless they think they can win. James met her gaze, and they were wrong. She leaned back, shaking her head. Damn right they were. He set his coffee down and folded his hands together. You know, Tracy, they saw me sitting in this chair and thought it meant I was alone, that I was weak. He let the words settle, watching as Tracy's smirk faded into something more thoughtful. But they didn't realize something. Tracy tilted her head. Yeah, what's that? James smiled faintly. I'm never alone. The silence stretched between them, not awkward but heavy with meaning. Tracy gave a slow nod, drumming her fingers against the table before standing. Well, she said, reaching for the coffee pot, I'll tell you this. Next time you decide to have a showdown in my parking lot, give me a little warning so I can grab some popcorn. James chuckled. The tension in the diner had eased. Conversations resumed, laughter drifted through the air, and life went on. But something felt different. Even the way people glanced at James, there was no pity anymore. Instead, there was respect. And James knew that respect had been earned, not because he fought, but because he didn't have to. A lesson that sticks. That night, as James rolled down the quiet streets toward his home, he let the events of the day settle in his mind. He thought about Bear and his crew, the way their bravado had crumbled the second real power had walked into the lot. He thought about the Sentinels, how they had shown up without hesitation because they understood something fundamental. Strength isn't about winning fights, it's about showing up when it matters. And he thought about all the people watching, the ones who would go home tonight and maybe, just maybe, think differently about what they had seen. Because today wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about one confrontation. It was about every person who had ever been underestimated, every person who had ever been seen as weak just because they didn't fit someone else's idea of what strength looked like. James knew this wouldn't be the last time he'd face people like Bear. But he also knew something even more important. The next time, he wouldn't even have to make the call. Because when you live your life with strength, with dignity, and with the right people in your corner, respect follows you everywhere. The diner hummed with life again, the tension from earlier nothing but a memory, or at least that's how it might have seemed to an outsider. But for James, the weight of the encounter still sat heavy on his shoulders. Not because he was shaken, he'd dealt with worse, but because it reminded him of something deeper. He sat at his booth, fingers wrapped around his coffee cup, staring out at the fading sunset. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, but behind it he could see the parking lot. Empty now, quiet. A few hours ago, that same space had been the stage for something raw, something real. The outlaw rebels had come in thinking they were untouchable, thinking their numbers and their size made them powerful, and for a moment maybe they had been, until they weren't. Tracy came by, setting down a fresh plate of food in front of him. On the house, she said, before he could argue. James chuckled. You know I can pay for my own food, right? She leaned a hip against the booth and gave him a pointed look. And I know you're too stubborn to ask for anything. He shook his head, picking up his fork. I didn't do anything special, Tracy. Just handled a situation. She let out a dry laugh. Handled a situation? You called in a damn cavalry, James. He took a bite of his food, giving her a knowing look. I called family. That silenced her for a moment. The word family meant something to people like them. It wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who stood beside you when it mattered. The ones who came without hesitation, no questions asked. The Sentinels weren't just bikers. They were a brotherhood, a community. And James was a part of that, whether people saw it or not. Tracy exhaled, crossing her arms. Those guys, Bear and his crew, they're not used to losing. James nodded slowly. I know. Think they'll come back? She asked, her voice quieter now. There was something underneath her words, a hint of worry she wouldn't say outright. James set his fork down, his expression turning serious. Maybe, but not for the same reason. She frowned. What do you mean? They might didn't just lose, he said. leaning back against the seat. "They learned." Tracy scoffed. "Doubt that. People like them don't change." James tilted his head slightly. "You sure about that?" Because he had seen it in Bear's eyes. The way his confidence cracked. The way he had to force himself to apologize. That wasn't just humiliation. That was realization. Maybe Bear wouldn't become a different man overnight. Maybe his crew would still go looking for fights. But they wouldn't look at someone like James the same way again. Tracy studied him, trying to decide if she believed that. Then she sighed. "Well, either way, if they do come back, I'm keeping a bat under the counter." James smirked. "I'll be sure to let them know you're the real threat." She rolled her eyes but grinned before walking off. As James ate, he let the moment settle. The air in the diner had shifted. People who had once stared at him with pity now saw something different. The truckers at the corner booth gave him nods of quiet respect. A young couple who had witnessed everything from the window offered him a small smile. It wasn't just about what happened outside. It was about what it meant. Strength wasn't just muscle. It wasn't about size or numbers. It was about standing firm when it mattered. By the time James finished his meal, the night had fully settled in. He paid for his food anyway. Tracy would argue about it later, but that was a fight for another day. As he rolled out of the diner, the air was crisp, the smell of asphalt and distant exhaust mixing with the lingering scent of coffee from inside. The world kept moving, unaware of the small battles that happened in parking lots and diners. But for James, this wasn't just another night. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and checked the screen, a message from Hawk, the leader of the Sentinels. "All good?" James smirked and typed back, "All good, appreciate you." The response came seconds later. "Always." He tucked the phone away and looked up at the sky. The stars were scattered across the darkness, quiet and unwavering. He thought about the outlaw rebels, about Bear, about how men like that only understood one language: power. And tonight they had learned that power doesn't always look the way they expect. James turned his chair toward the road, the wheels moving effortlessly over the pavement. He wasn't a fighter, he didn't need to be. Because power wasn't about how hard you hit. It was about how unshakable you were when someone tried to knock you down. And tonight James had proven, to Bear, to the diner full of onlookers, to anyone watching, that he would never be knocked down. As James rolled down the dimly lit sidewalk, the hum of the diner fading behind him, he allowed himself a slow breath. The night air was cool, carrying the distant hum of highway traffic, the occasional chirp of crickets. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was. The world moved fast, but James had learned long ago that real power lay in patience. Tonight had proven that once again. A fight never needed fists to be won. His phone buzzed in his pocket again, another message, this time from a number he didn't recognize. "You got us thinking tonight." James stopped. His fingers hovered over the screen before he typed a response. "Who is this?" The reply came faster than he expected. "Does it matter?" He exhaled, staring at the screen for a long moment before tucking the phone away. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. Maybe the man wasn't ready to admit it out loud. Maybe his pride was still too thick to let him say the words directly. But this was the beginning of something. A seed planted. A lesson learned, even if it wasn't fully understood yet. James shook his head with a faint smirk and kept moving. Ahead, the streetlights stretched in a long, glowing path leading home. This night would pass, others would come, but something about this one felt different. It was proof that, sometimes, the ones who think they hold all the power, the ones who push, intimidate, try to make themselves bigger by making others smaller, are the ones who walk away changed. Maybe, just maybe, Bear had walked away with something more than just bruised pride tonight. Maybe he had walked away with respect. James didn't need an apology. He didn't need validation. All he needed was the knowledge that he had stood his ground. Because when you do that, the world notices. And that was more powerful than any fight. This story is more than just an encounter in a parking lot. It's a reminder of the strength found in quiet resilience, the power of unity, and the undeniable force of standing your ground against intimidation. In today's world where prejudice and power struggles still exist, true strength isn't about physical dominance. It's about knowing who you are and refusing to be shaken. James didn't need to fight with fists. He won with patience, intelligence, and a quiet confidence that turned the tables without ever throwing a punch. And that's a lesson for all of us. If this story inspired you, if you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Let's spread stories that remind us that respect, courage, and unity will always outshine fear and hate. Together, we make the world stronger.